A very good evening. Welcome to another edition of World Today. This is your one-stop show when it comes to news from the developments from across the world. I'm Anil Thomas. On the show tonight, we're going to get you the latest, especially when it comes to the developments that are taking place between North Korea and South Korea. Also taking a look at German elections, the results that have come, and the SDP on how it's going to form the government. Lots to look forward to in the next 1 hour. I'm Anil Thomas. Let's get started with the top headlines. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar meets Mexican President in Mexico City, holds discussion with his counterpart Marcelo Ebrard. Also attends the Independence Day celebration in Mexico City. North Korea fires unidentified projectile into the sea of East Coast. Pyongyang's UN envoy says North Korea has the right to test weapons given hostile policies. South Korea expresses regret over North Korea's missile launch. Fuel stations run dry in major cities in UK due to panic buying. Government puts military on standby as part of further measures to address the supply chain crisis. Says no shortage of fuel and problems caused by consumers panic buying fuel without need. China witnesses major power supply crisis threatening entire power grids as industrial production grids grinds to a halt and traffic lights fail amid power rationing, with more than half of the country enduring power cuts, making it one of the most extreme examples of energy rationing in the nation's history. In sports, in Champions League, Liverpool will be up against Group B Porto in Portugal, and in Group A, Paris Saint-Germain to seek revenge against Manchester City at home tonight. Well, a power-packed 60 minutes there. Let's begin with the big news. Well, North Korea fired a short-range missile into the sea early on Tuesday, the latest weapon test by North Korea that has raised questions about the sincerity of its recent offer for talks with South Korea. The South Korean Joint Chief of Staff, in a statement, added that South Korean military is maintaining a readiness posture for potential additional launches. Meanwhile, the U.S. military's Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii said it was consulting with allies and partners about the North Korean test.
Just days after it tested a new railway-borne missile system, North Korea once again fired an unidentified projectile towards the sea off its east coast early on Wednesday morning, according to South Korea's military. The announcement came as North Korea's ambassador to the United Nations called on 27 September for the United States to give up its hostile policy towards Pyongyang and said no one could deny his country's right to self-defense and to test weapons.
Recently, South Korean authorities are hell-bent on developing ultra-modern weapons under the tacit approval and patronage of the US, and numerous war equipments have been shipped into South Korea. These are all two dangerous moves that break the balance of military power of the Korean peninsula. Given the US-South Korean military alliance increases military threat against the DPRK, nobody can deny the righteous right to self-defense for the DPRK to develop, test, manufacture and purchase the weapon systems equivalent to ones which are possessed or being developed by them.
South Korea's defense ministry expressed regret over North Korea's latest missile launch amid Pyongyang's call for the United States and South Korea to scrap their hostile policy.
We are analyzing the situation and intention of North Korea's missile launch. Also, we think the missile launch is regrettable at a time when we urgently need to stabilize the situation in North Korea peninsula.
Following North Korea's action, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has heightened alert and surveillance.
Earlier this morning, North Korea has launched what could possibly be ballistic missile. In response to this situation, I have asked my government to collect information, make the utmost effort in analyzing the launch, swiftly provide relevant information to the Japanese people, check safety for aircraft and ship, and be fully prepared for any contingencies. The Japanese government will more than ever heighten alert and surveillance. In any case, we are currently analyzing the situation of the launch.
It was only on 15th of September that North Korea fired a new railway-borne missile system designed as a potential counter-strike to any threatening forces, and it is less than 2 weeks that it has tested a new railway-borne missile system. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, let us try and understand North Korea and its thermonuclear bombs. It all began in this particular area where it all begins. This is the testing ground, Puneri. That's where all the tests have begun. It began way back in 2006 and then followed 3 years later in 2009. Then in 2013 is the next test that took place. But after that in 2016, you see there are 2 dates, January and September, where there are twin tests that have taken place. And in 2017, North Korea conducted by far its biggest or its largest nuclear test to date, again in the same site. That's this site that the US has a lot of concerns about. Estimates of the size or the device's explosive power or yield range from 100 to 370 kilotons. If you put that into perspective, a yield of roughly around 100 kilotons would make the test 6 times more powerful than the bomb dropped in Hiroshima in 1945 during the Second World War. So North Korea now claims that this test was the first thermonuclear weapon, the most potent form of nuclear explosion, where an atomic detonation is boosted by a secondary fusion process to produce a far bigger blast. When one looks at it, 6.3 is the magnitude that one looks at. So you can understand the impact that would be created if that thermonuclear bomb explodes. Now let's also understand the missiles that North Korea has in its armors. Experts say that the unveiling of the new missiles appear to be a message, especially to the Biden administration, of North Korea's growing military prowess. Some of these are tested. When you look at these top almost 6, I put them in the brown line here. One that you see both the things down, KN-14 and KN-08. These both are not tested and these both are not operational. Rest of the 6 missiles that you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the missiles that you see, all these missiles are tested and very much in operational. And the distance that you see, this is the range of these missiles when it comes to kilometers, if one puts it in kilometers. One final slide that I will put across to you. When one talks about North Korea and South Korea, let's also compare their forces and see how their forces are purely in terms of number. So when one looks at North Korea and South Korea, this is where the cause of concern is 12,70,000 as compared to a 5,99,000. So that's where the cause of concern is. Also, when one looks at the reserve forces that both the countries have, roughly around over 6 lakh reserve forces that North Korea has as compared to 31 lakh of reserve forces. But remember, most of the artillery that they have are old and obsolete. But they have conventional forces that North Korea has that could still inflict massive damage in case a war breaks out. So this is why there is always a fueling unease, especially when it comes to the 2 Korean partners, especially North Korea and South Korea. Well, we need to get a perspective on the way ahead, on what could it mean, especially when one looks at the the situation currently, the situation that's developing there in North Korea, South Korea also doing its part of testing. How could this particular thing play out, especially in the continent and on a global perspective? Well, we'll try and get experts talking on that particular issue, especially when it comes to this particular development. We've got former Indian ambassador to the Republic of Korea joining us on World Today, S. Atayal, joining us this evening. Good evening, sir. Welcome to World Today. How would one look at the present situation, especially considering that North Korea has fired a missile? They have come to the UN and defended their weapon test. How should one see it, or what's the way forward, if I may ask in simple terms?
North Korea looks at its nuclear and missile capacity as a deterrence capacity, not as an offensive capacity against any other nation. And they needed perhaps for regime survival, as the world has seen what United States has done to Afghanistan, what it has done to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and what the Western powers did to Colonel Gaddafi in Libya. That is one part. Second, that there are very crippling international sanctions under the auspices of the UN on North Korea, which are hurting badly. The food crisis in North Korea is very acute, and there is economic stagnation. And since 2018, one saw a lot of movement between North Korea, Kim Jong-un, President Donald Trump, and of United States, the then president, and President Moon Jae-in of South Korea. But the objectives of these three parties are different. North Korea wants easing of sanctions so that their economic distress is less. It is ready to freeze its nuclear and missile program, but not give it up. United States wants denuclearization of Korean Peninsula and end of the Korean War, which is still armistice. And South Korea wants that one, no war on Korean Peninsula ever in future, and it wants to normalize relations with North Korea. So the three principal parties have different objectives, and President Biden administration has largely ignored North Korea in the last 8 months they are in power. And in United Nations also, President Biden's statement was that they will continue with sustained diplomacy. So perhaps these tests are to attract attention of the United States and the international community that there is a problem on Korean Peninsula. North Korean people are suffering because of economic sanctions. So something needs to be done.
Okay, considering the fact that the testing took place just 1 hour before their, their envoy to the UN spoke, does that somewhere give a feeling, especially that North Korea wants to do, we will do what we want, in the garb of rights, rights for, or rights to self-defense, is that the message that they want to send, through the UN to the world?
Yes, that is part of the message, but another very disturbing news which is coming from International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna is that North Korea has started again producing plutonium, which can be used for nuclear weapons. And that means that the nuclear program, which was perhaps frozen for the last 2 years, has again been started. Here I may add that even South Korea has tested a submarine-based ballistic missile. So both Koreas have to be treated equally in my view. And if the world criticizes North Korea, then world should also say something to South Korea.
Okay, Ambassador Tal, considering the fact that both North and South Korea have, done their series of testings when it comes to ballistic missiles, is there a war that's breaking out, especially, arms race, I would say, especially to control the peninsula?
Arms race, yes, but I do not foresee any hostile activity on Korean Peninsula in the near future, because the people of North Korea and South Korea, as well as the leadership of North Korea and South Korea, seem to be warming towards each other. And 2018, when President Moon Jae-in had gone to Hanoi, February 2019, it was a very, September 2018, it was a very warm summit with public address, etc. So the Korean people seem to be moving towards some kind of a friendship towards each other, but Americans are standing in the way, and they want first denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, and only then some kind of normalization between North Korea and South Korea. And here I would add that the present president of South Korea, President Moon Jae-in, belongs to that tradition, that liberal wing, the democratic wing of South Korean politics, which believes in a sunshine policy of easing relations with North Korea. And his two predecessors had two earlier summits with Kim Jong-un's father 15 years ago.
Now considering the fact that both North Korea and South Korea have done ballistic missile testing, but throw some light, especially for our audience, why do these countries needs to do this kind of testing on a regular basis?
For South Korea, there were some restrictions on the range of their ballistic missiles,
Okay.
and America wanted to keep some kind of a control over South Korean military capacity, that they do not unilaterally do something against North Korea. But those restrictions on the range of missiles have now been reportedly lifted by United States. And for North Korea, it is a matter of capacity building, that they should be able to strike at Japan, they should be able to strike at American troops in Guam, and ultimately they should have, or they are going to have, or want to have the capacity to strike at mainland United States, which America will never let them have.
But Ambassador Tayal, do you also see a possibility of the two Koreans coming on board, especially across the table, talking it out with no conditions attached, especially looking at the way things are?
Very much so. In fact, if you see the two statements of Chairman Kim Jong-un's sister,
True.
Kim Yo-jong, who is very powerful in the North Korean hierarchy, just in the last 4 or 5 days, she made two very good statements. That one, North Korea may be open to formally declare an end to Korean War. And second, that North Korea is ready to consider an inter-Korean summit. Because President Moon Jae-in's 5-year term ends in May 2022.
Okay.
And he, I think, has established some kind of a good personal relationship with Chairman Kim Jong-un. So there are lots of moving parts in this whole scenario, and let us see where it goes. But any confrontation on Korean Peninsula is not on the cards.
But do you see some kind of an headway, especially when it comes to the nuclear talks with North Korea possible, or do you see that totally at a standstill at this point of time?
When there was this Hanoi summit in February 2019 between President Donald Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un, they were very close to a deal. And the issue was whether there should be a kind of a small deal, which South Korea was also pushing, or the American establishment.
Yeah, go on, Mr. Tayal.
American establishment wanted a comprehensive deal in which everything will be decided in one go, and that did not happen.
Okay.
And the idea was to have a small deal in the sense that some easing of sanctions on North Korea, and with the absolute freezing of any future testing or of nuclear weapons or any kind of missiles. That could have been a good step forward to lead to eventual goal of denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. But the American establishment, their NSA, etc., they did not allow President Donald Trump to sign on the deal. In fact, reportedly, President Trump was inclined to sign that.
Okay, the US stance on North Korea is very clear, stop that nuclear missile program and then we'll try and lift some sanctions. Do you see a possibility of that in the near future, considering the fluid state that we are in?
The steps will have to be reciprocal and gradual, because there is lack of trust between United States and North Korea. But South Korea and the President Moon Jae-in of South Korea is trying to play the role of an honest broker. But I feel, yes, progress is possible, but it will have to be gradual and in some kind of reciprocal commitments. Because the North Korean history, if one looks at in the last 20 years, has been to promise, even sign agreements, and then not follow those agreements. And so their credibility in the eyes of the international community is rather low. That's why it may be better to go for verifiable steps, gradual steps, which eventually lead to the lifting of sanctions over North Korea, as well as denuclearization of Korean Peninsula.
Okay, do you see a possibility of that, considering the softening of especially the second in command when it comes to North Korea, the sister, they're clearly indicating that, talks could be possible. Do you somewhere feel that, North Korea is looking at South Korea to get US on the table and then maybe look at, some kind of a window where they can navigate to get something more out of it?
Very much so. North Korea and South Korea perhaps want to have some kind of an understanding.
Okay.
In fact, after the Pyongyang summit, their joint declaration is very positive, and even on defense side, that the two armies will talk to each other, and there has been a lot of reduction of hostilities, reduction in deployment of forces in the demilitarized zone. And South Korea really wants to open up rail and road links with North Korea and wants to start investing in North Korea. But North Korean leadership is very temperamental, and sometimes they allow something, and then again they had blown up the office where the inter-Korean dialogue used to take place on the border. So there are issues. There is lack of trust, but there is a desire in the present leadership of South Korea to place more trust in North Korea and in Chairman Kim Jong-un, and give him economic relief, food supply, even some investment, and try to gradually have more normalization between North Korea and South Korea.
Okay, how would you look at China's role in this whole process? Because, we remember China's foreign minister speaking to the South Korean foreign minister, talking about, the Korean peninsula and the need for peace and stability there.
China's role has been a little unclear, because all the verbal statements are that they are against any kind of nuclearization by North Korea or their nuclear tests. But their actions seem to be that the border between China and North Korea seems to be open for trade. So that the sanctions have not been as crippling on North Korea as they could have otherwise been. And also there is a question that since North Korea is displaying a very advanced level of technology, whether it is in computers, whether it is in metallurgical sciences, because to have a nuclear test or to have a missile test, you need cryogenic engines, you need a very high level of technology in different areas. And does North Korea have it? And if not, who is giving that country the technology? That is a question which does not have a clear answer, and perhaps there could be some kind of a Chinese hand in this nuclear and missile capacity of North Korea.
Considering North Korea's fragile economy and followed by the sanctions that have been imposed on them and the coronavirus pandemic, they seem to be, the worst ever position if one looks at purely in terms of the way things stand. Does that give the US, US is doing that wait and watch, push North Korea to the wall where they concede? Do you feel, that's an alternative that the US is looking at, considering what Biden has said in the last few weeks, especially when it comes to, tensions in the Korean peninsula?
Two things. One, that North Korean economic situation is very dire. In fact, earlier this year, there was a meeting where Chairman Kim Jong-un reportedly became emotional and shed some tears, saying that he regrets that the leadership has not been able to meet the expectations of the people for a better life. And again, he has said to his people that the quality of life in North Korea needs to improve, but it is not happening. And it cannot happen without the lifting of sanctions by the United Nations and more economic engagement with the outside world. And as far as the United States is concerned, I think in Biden administration's radar at present, North Korea is very much in the background.
Okay.
Whether they will push it to the corner, a lot of people feel that North Koreans are very proud people. They are very nationalistic. and no country can push them to the wall. We all remember the Korean War,
True.
and even they have undergone acute hardships
Hmm.
to retain their independence.
Okay.
And even to the Chinese, they keep them at a distance. So it will be a folly to try to push the
Okay.
North Koreans to the wall. It is better to cooperate with them and gradually lead them to a more normal behavior.
Well, the possible alternative that one looks at is to use South Korea and North Korea come for a dialogue, open dialogue, and then maybe look at South Korea to get some leverage, especially when it comes to sanctions being lifted for North Korea. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Ambassador Tayal, for joining us this evening, giving us an insight, especially to the Korean Peninsula and the building tensions there in that particular region. But since I mentioned China, let's stick to China. China is facing a different crisis altogether. China is witnessing a power supply crisis that has turned critical in recent days, threatening the entire power grids as industrial production grinds to a halt and traffic lights fail amid power rationing. With more than half of the country enduring power cuts, making it one of the most extreme examples of energy rationing in the nation's history, especially considering the impact it is having on regular households. It has triggered widespread alarm among much of the population and plunging the nation's industrial sector into chaos. Poor communication and unclear timelines for power rationing has worsened the confusion and public anger. Major provinces affected include Guangdong, Henan, Xinjiang, Wuhan, Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Inner Mongolia. As per reports, the northeastern provinces of many regions there are now seeing widespread household power outages, with many angry and confused residents taking their complaints to social media, saying the electricity cuts have come during peak hours without sufficient warning. In the northeast too, especially in the regions and provinces that are facing a surge of electricity consumption as the chilly winter season draws near, power cuts are common in China and are usually restricted to industrial users, but their frequency has risen since the second half of last year and has now been extended to households, making it one of the most extreme examples of energy rationing in the nation's history. Many companies, including small firms, have had to shift production to overnight, reduce the output, or cease operations entirely. Experts also expect the wide-reaching impacts of the dramatic energy consumption to last until the end of this year. And let's say the outages had resulted from Beijing's tightening of coal supplies and pressure on local governments to meet energy consumption targets before year end. They warn that further disruptions risk aggravating inflation while pummeling production. The latest setback comes after some analysts raised alarms over China's economic outlook in recent weeks. Well, we got our correspondent, the Prasar Bharati correspondent, joining us this evening to give us an insight, especially into that crisis there, the power crisis there. Anshuman joining us this evening all the way from Beijing. Good evening, Anshuman. Good to see you there. First things, how would one look at the power crisis there, and what could be blamed? Rationing is one of the reasons that has been given, but how big is this particular crisis in China?
Anil, as winter approaches, especially in the northern parts of China, so these power cuts are quite common here, as you just said. But this year, this is extremely severe. It has started affecting households.
Okay.
And the main reason which is being seen behind this is the extremely severe coal supply shortages. Since China banned Australian coal last year, since then the supplies were in short. But this year, this has aggravated the situation, mostly because of China's increasing industrial activities, as well as in recent times, as well as the increasing energy demands, especially in the northern parts because of the winters and large heating devices usage and all. So another reason you can say this coal supply is one, then the shortages in coal production. So that also, like China has stopped, closed many of their old coal mines due to safety reasons. That also has affected the production, which recently government has again instructed many coal mines to increase their production. Also, they have not resorted to any increase in the imports of coal from foreign countries, which now only they have realized that they need to import the coal from other countries, for example, Russia, Mongolia, Indonesia, at any cost. You see, at any cost, because they don't have much time and the crisis is quite severe.
Okay.
It's a different matter, like how these countries will be able to fulfill the demand from China, because they already have their own demands from other importers. So that is one thing. So it's quite serious, Anil. Uh, from north to south, this issue is there. The regions may be different in some provinces, as you just mentioned, and we are seeing here from certain statements from
Okay.
provincial governments that they are rationing it as part of their agenda to reduce the energy demand, to reduce their annual energy usage as directed by the central government. So, but the main reason which is being seen here, that is the severe coal shortage.
You know, does it pose a risk when one looks at the, global supply chain? Is there a likelihood of a bear hug, actually coming to the global supply chain? And how do you see Chinese economy getting affected due to this particular power cut?
I mean, the Chinese economy, Chinese production line, Chinese industries, they are heavily dependent on coal-based power.
Okay.
We know that China's power grid, the power supply, it's mostly driven by more than 50%, around 60% power supply is driven by coal-based power plants. And due to this current crisis, around 40% or more than 40% of industrial activities of China are being hampered. And in fact, if we say today's Goldman Sachs analysis, so they have reduced the economic growth outlook for China for this year, at least by more than 1%. So it's definitely going to affect the production capacity, the production lines in China, as we have seen that many industries, small industries, big industries in provinces like Guangdong, which are like powerhouses of industrial production in China. So many industries have reduced their production line. They have stopped their production line maybe to 2 days in a week, or few to 1 day, in fact, in a week.
Okay.
So all these are definitely going to affect the production line, and of course it's going to impact the global supply chain also in some way.
Okay, we'll leave it there. It's a serious situation that China is facing at this point in time. Almost 40% of their industrial production getting affected due to this particular power outages. Thank you and appreciate you joining us this evening on World Today, giving us an insight, especially into that power crisis that China faces, and China looking at options from where it now can import coal, especially to meet the rising demands with the winter season approaching right from the north to the south of China. So clearly a big problem that China faces purely in terms of getting its act together. But one final word, Anshuman, before I let you go, this could be a crisis that was very much on the radar, considering the ban that they had put, especially when it comes to coal coming from Australia. Did China think of some other alternative? Because this was almost very much coming. Do you feel that China has been caught off guard?
Anil, I think yes, there is a catch-22 situation for China, because you see China's economy is heavily dependent on coal. Then China has stopped import of Australian coal. Then you see President Xi last year announced that China will become carbon neutral by 2060. So all these things, and then they have put another. You see these back-to-back new sort of instructions, regulations, requirements. So they have again put another requirement to reduce the energy consumption by 3% at the end of 2021. So all these things are creating lots of confusion, and it seems that the alternate plans were not in place, and maybe they thought that it could be managed by by reducing the consumption of power. But of course, it has affected common lives here in many provinces. And in fact, it has forced certain government officials to make the statement that we should not go into a rush kind of behavior. We should not impose certain irrational kind of activities, which can impact the production capacity and which can impact the GDP and also which can affect the normal livelihood. More so when the Golden Week is around the corner and people would be moving to their families and to enjoy the 7 days of National Day holiday and also the Mid-Autumn Festival. So it's definitely going to dampen that spirit.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you and appreciate you joining us this evening, getting us the latest developments, especially when it comes to the power crisis in China. That was our correspondent Anshuman giving us the latest from Beijing, especially when it comes to the crisis that China faces and the necessity, especially when it comes to the usage of power that needed to be checked, and China trying to do its best, especially when it comes to meeting the standards. But the common man clearly paying a huge price, especially when it comes to backup plans not being put in place to meet the rising demand of power. Moving on, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar took part in a commemorative event of the 200th anniversary of Mexican independence along with other world leaders. Dr. S. Jaishankar met Bangladeshi MOS for Foreign Affairs Mohammad Shahriar Alam at the Independence Day celebrations in Mexico City. Dr. Jaishankar also met the Prime Minister of Belize, John Birceno. He appreciated the Prime Minister's warm words on vaccine Maitri. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met his Mexican counterpart Marcelo Ebrard on Monday. Both the leaders held comprehensive discussion on a wide range of issues. They reviewed the political cooperation, trade and investment, along with space and scientific potential, cultural exchanges and consular issues. They also shared perspectives on governance, challenges and global narratives. Taking to Twitter, External Affairs Minister said, and I quote, "As independent powers committed to a multipolar world, India and Mexico must collaborate more closely in international forums. Glad to note our Mexican partners reciprocating this sentiment." External Affairs Minister also attended the Grandeur of Mexico exhibition on the return of heritage. He met the Mexican President Andres Manuel and Foreign Minister of Mexico Marcelo Ebrard in the Grandeur of Mexico exhibition. He also met the First Lady at the exhibition. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar tweeted, and I quote, "Delighted to meet the First Lady of Serbia and my good friend Nicolae Selkovic. Glad to learn that the First Lady is an enthusiast and an ardent practitioner of yoga." Dr. S. Jaishankar also paid homage to Mahatma Gandhi in Mexico City. He said this was appropriate on the occasion of the anniversary of Mexican independence. Well, shifting to the UK oil crisis, the army there is ready to help ease the fuel supply problems in United Kingdom after a fourth day of long queues and pump closures. Up to 150 military tanker drivers will prepare to deliver to forecourts, which is having a run dry because of panic buying. UK is estimated to be short of more than 1 lakh lorry drivers, causing problems for a range of industries, including food supplies and supermarkets in recent months. Factors including Brexit, the pandemic, pay levels and an aging workforce have all contributed to the shortage of lorry drivers.
Panic and chaos grips world's fifth largest economy. Up to 90% of British fuel stations ran dry across major cities on 27 September after panic buying deepened a supply chain crisis triggered by a shortage of truckers. A dire post-Brexit shortage of lorry drivers emerging after the COVID-19 pandemic has sown chaos through British supply chains in everything from food to fuel, raising the spectre of disruptions and price rises in the run-up to Christmas. Britain has put the army on standby to deliver fuel from Tuesday, but taxi drivers claim it is a massive worry for them.
Apart from the anxiety of not being able to work on the back of 18 months of not knowing what's going on, where the next job's coming from. We've just started to get some work, and now we've been hit with this. It's massive. Friends of mine have not been able to come to work this morning because they're so